Come on, this is a multi-million-dollar company. You can't make that look better?
Wrestling with Wregret. Let's get it. Yeah.
Happy anniversary, AEW. This week, All Elite Wrestling celebrates their 3rd anniversary on television, and it is indeed a huge accomplishment. Through the last 3 years, this young promotion has gone through the ringer. Amazing highs, wild lows, lots of great moments and stars have been made in AEW's short history, but this video is not talking about those things. This week, in honor of the big milestone, I'm gonna rank them. My pick for the top 8 worst things AEW's done in the last 3 years. But real quick, if you want to hear me talk about the good things they've done in that same time period, I have a countdown for that as well, and it's right here. Let's begin. Number 8, the ending to the first Blood and Guts. In early 2020, rumors were swirling of a new match type in AEW called Blood and Guts, basically war games with a trademark-friendly name. But the pandemic postponed its debut by more than a year, and on May of 2021, fans finally witnessed the first ever match of its kind in AEW. The Inner Circle and the Pinnacle fought in a bloody war that saw MJF's team win before Friedman hurled his rival Chris Jericho off the top of the cage and onto the ramp below. Only it didn't look nearly as devastating once Chris made impact. Visible crash pads and cheap-looking imitation diamond-plated panels immediately killed the illusion that these guys were in a real life-and-death struggle. As the inaugural edition of what's been billed as one of AEW's most violent matches, this final image went over poorly with the fans. Number 7. Tony's Twitter Talk. When WCW was doing well in the late 1990s, you couldn't shut Eric Bischoff up. The EVP of WCW would constantly crow about his talent and his ratings while slagging on the WWF and giving away the results of taped events on Monday Nitro. Lots of folks thought that Eric's braggadocious behavior was detrimental then, but imagine how things would have been if Twitter were around while Eazy-E were in power. As the owner and public face of AEW, Tony Khan has used his platform on Twitter to hype up his shows, welcome wrestlers into the fold, and celebrate the company's achievements. You can tell from the passion in his tweets just how much Tony loves wrestling and how proud he is of what the talent's accomplished over the last 3 years, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, Tony's time on Twitter is somewhat of a double-edged sword. He has stepped on a lot of proverbial rakes over the years with his online comments. From the benign, like making a joke at Vince McMahon's expense following his ousting, or correcting a fan for tagging the wrong Tony Khan, to more concerning, like when he publicly accused WWE of paying for anti-AEW bots to appear on the platform, or when he dragged Big Swole for making perfectly valid criticisms about the company. It's hard for wrestlers to want to speak openly on subjects, lest they risk a public finger-wagging from a former boss that can lead to more harassment. Though it is refreshing for the owner of a major wrestling company to be so transparent on social media, unfortunately it's led to a lot of unnecessary drama. Number 6. The oversaturation of stables. Considering who's in charge there, it's no surprise that some of AEW's booking philosophies are borrowed heavily from the way things are done in New Japan, in particular the company's emphasis on stables. In this system, very few individuals in AEW are just that. They usually belong to some larger group, which may or may not have good team cohesion or a good reason to exist in the first place. Some of the company's biggest acts are stables: the Elite, the Dark Order, the Jericho Appreciation Society, and so forth, but they can't all be at that level. What ends up happening is that some stables will rise to the top and others get left by the wayside. For every Blackpool Combat Club or Inner Circle, there's been groups like the Nightmare Collective, the Wingmen, the Andrade Hardy Family Office, or the Pinnacle. God, the Pinnacle! What a total waste of a supergroup that was. Instead of 1 or 2 people not showing up on TV, it's more like 5 or 6 at once who aren't getting a good chance to shine. Furthermore, this need to assign all these wrestlers to different groups appears to be a byproduct of another issue AEW's had over the years. Number 5. Too many new toys. Let me say right away, there is nothing wrong with wrestlers going from one company to the next. It's a business, these guys gotta get paid, and the market will bear what it will bear and all that. And hey, who doesn't love a great surprise return or debut or reveal? But lately it feels like it's been too much of a good thing. Whether it's been former WWE stars or international players or rising indie sensations, AEW spent the last several years collecting weapons in their wrestling arms race. But at the end of the day, there's only so much time available in the week to feature their wrestlers, and with such a bloated roster, that means there's lots of talent left to wither on the vine. While all the new guys and gals have been trickling in, that means fewer and fewer spots for those who've already been there putting in the work. Guys like Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, Miro, Lance Archer, and Andrade El Idolo are hardly in better spots now than when they first showed up. The same happened with Ruby Soho, who lost an insane amount of momentum in record time. And just what the hell are they doing with FTR these days? Considering how big a deal all these shiny new toys are treated when they first show up, to see how most of them have turned out is kind of shocking. AEW has no shortage of talent, but what's the point of having all that talent if you can't showcase it effectively? The company's insistence on generating buzz, mostly through debuts and reveals, makes it mean less each time and can have damaging long-term effects. Number 4. The Cody Verse. A couple of months ago, I talked about a lot of the creative pitfalls that happened in Cody Rhodes' AEW run, particularly near the end of it. But in all that time in the video, I failed to address it by its proper name, the Cody Verse. For much of his run in the land of the elite, Rhodes was an island unto himself. He'd start a feud with someone, often a fresh signee who had just been released from WWE. The new guy would beat up one of Cody's friends, then beat Cody up, then Cody would get his heat back, rinse and repeat. Sometimes things would end only after one match instead of a series. The programs were often wrought with emotion and drama, but by the end, almost none of Cody's opponents came out looking as good or better than they had at the start. Feuds with guys like Anthony Ogogo, Malachi Black, Andrade, and Shaquille O'Neal were often met with rolled eyes, and most fans could see the writing on the wall before the first bell had rung. While so many other things creatively were firing on multiple cylinders, Cody's run felt odd and disjointed compared to everything else, seeming to exist solely as fodder for he and Brandy's reality TV show. Cody and AEW had the unenviable task of being both a gatekeeper and a star maker, and since in storyline he couldn't fight for the world title, that put him in this weird Undertaker-like position, something being separate but equal to the main event. To say that he didn't help anyone get over is being dishonest, but the existence of the Codyverse made things there stand out from everything else AEW was offering, and not always in the best way. Number 3. The treatment of the women's division. What a shock! One of the first glaring problems AEW's had from the jump has not really been rectified. History has shown time and again that women's wrestling can draw, and WWE's proving that you can make credible and highly marketable female stars. But somehow the folks at AEW have missed that memo, as we can see almost every week on TV. Even compared to WWE, the ladies of All Elite get a laughably small amount of airtime compared to the men across both Dynamite and Rampage. New ladies previously seen in WWE, usually brought in to challenge either Britt Baker or Jade Cargill, have failed to make any significant impact. The only women's main event to date on Dynamite was technically unsanctioned and therefore technically unofficial. Until recently, several of the past women's champions were barely on the show. When CM Punk had to walk away due to injury as champion, he got a lengthy in-ring promo. When Thunder Rosa had to do the same thing, she got a backstage interview that went less than a minute. When asked why there was a disparity, Tony Khan explained that he didn't think a Thunder send-off would have done as good a rating. Wow, isn't it amazing how that prophecy went and fulfilled itself? I'll never knock the ladies for working with what they've given, but in 3 years, AEW has barely addressed what I consider to be their biggest creative blind spot. It's a classic case of one step forward, two steps back. There have been inklings of progress, but if you don't consistently showcase the women in meaningful matches and segments, of course no one's going to care about them. Number 2. The exploding barbed wire deathmatch. Kenny Omega shocked everyone in December of 2020 when he cheated to win the AEW World title. His first major defense against Jon Moxley came the following February in the company's first ever exploding barbed wire deathmatch, which, after what we saw, is probably going to be their last. Now, it's worth pointing out that pretty much everything leading up to the finish had been done pretty well, but everyone knows that fans only remember the last thing that happens. The timer reached 0 and a massive explosion was expected, but never received. In that moment, I think we were all channeling our inner Marvin the Martian.
Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom!
Give all the credit in the world to Moxley and Eddie Kingston for trying to cover up how silly it all looked in the following Dynamite, but there was no hiding the truth of how bad the ending had gone. Between this and the gaffe at the end of the First Blood and Guts, AEW has often shown that when they have a stunt that requires several moving parts, they tend to overthink it and it comes out looking not so great in the end. Sometimes less is more. Before I present number 1, my honorable mention for the worst of AEW in 3 years goes to the rise and immediate fall of the Hardy Boys. As we all know, Matt got a head start in AEW, arriving in early 2020. He spent most of that year feuding with Sammy Guevara, including a match at that year's All Out. Infamously, that match is mostly known for Hardy's head bouncing off the concrete during a table spot gone wrong. Despite showing clear signs of a concussion, Matt was allowed to carry the match to completion, which left a bad taste in many people's mouths. He's gone on to do fairly well for himself since then, but the botch still stands out to many fans more than 2 years later. Then there's Brother Nero. Old Jeff made his debut earlier this year after being released by WWE. The Hardys reunion was in full swing, meaning that every single week for like a month, Jeff would take ridiculous bump after ridiculous bump. It seemed as if they were trying to milk every high spot they could out of the guy at some insane pace. But before Jeff could pull a Matt and really hurt himself, Jeff ended up pulling a Jeff and got arrested for a DUI in Florida, leading to a suspension that remains ongoing as of this recording. Safe to say the Hardys collectively have had an extremely disappointing run in the company. And my pick for the number 1 worst AEW moment in the last 3 years is Brawl Out. For the last 3 years, AEW has been riding high on big matches, big stars, and of course a lot of goodwill. But if there's one point you could look at and see where the honeymoon ended for many, or when its innocence was finally broken, it would have to be this, the fallout of All Out 2022. When CM Punk first debuted for AEW after a 7-year hiatus from wrestling, it was a joyous occasion for the company. But by just 1 year later, the bloom had seemingly fallen off the rose. Stories of ill will and infighting between Punk and other members of the roster had been brewing. After winning the AEW title from Jon Moxley in the main event of All Out, Punk sat down at the media scrum and, without prompting, vented his frustrations with Colt Cabana, Kenny Omega, and the Young Bucks. After saying his piece, the EVPs entered Punk's locker room with AEW's head of legal, and before long, Punk allegedly threw the first punch and things broke down from there. Every wrestler and producer involved in the fight received a suspension, meaning the new World and Trios champions were stripped of their titles, and as of now, CM Punk's future with the company remains in limbo. It was an embarrassing, unnecessary spectacle for everyone involved, fueled by backstage politics and a lack of intervention back when it could have meant something. The aftermath of All Out left a huge black eye on AEW's reputation and added fuel to the fire from some fans who questioned Tony Khan's leadership. Now, he might use this fight as a learning tool and a jumping off point for a new, more serious way of doing things, but some fans are saying, and I certainly don't agree with this, that this fight could be the beginning of the end. But whether it winds up helping the company or accelerating a potential path to ruin, this petty fight that's marred the company's standing and has completely upended creative plans for an untold number of individuals is my pick for the worst moment in AEW's 3-year history. Now, I'm sure some of you can come up with more, so please fire away in the comment section below. And hey, not all about negativity here. Of course, AEW has done some tremendous things these last 3 years, and if you want to hear me talk about those, you can click the link to my right, that's your left, to get that countdown. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell for all the latest content to come your way when it drops. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.